Subiaco Oval was Perth's premier ground before Optus Stadium. Before Marvel Stadium, it was Waverley Park who held the title of Victoria's co-major stadium. And before the brilliant Adelaide Oval was used for footy, its predecessor was Football Park. Those and much more as we go through why some AFL stadiums no longer exist. Alongside Marvel Stadium, back in the day, Waverley or VFL Park was Victoria's co-major ground. Waverley Park used to be able to hold over 100,000 people and actually had renovation plans to make the capacity 157,000. That would have made it the largest sporting stadium in the world. Waverley was mostly used by Hawthorn, it was used by some other Victorian clubs, and it was also majorly used by St Kilda for an 8-year period during the 90s. This stadium had some iconic moments. In 1996, the lights went out. In 1991, it held a grand final where Hawthorn beat West Coast. The first ever footballing night match was played here between Fitzroy and North Melbourne. And in 1992, it saw Jason Dunstall kick 17 goals. However, in 1988, concrete cancer was discovered in Waverley, which deemed the ground unsafe and unsuitable for events to be held there in the future. The last professional Aussie rules game played here was in 1999, where Hawthorn took on Sydney in front of 72,130 people. The WACA ground was used for 14 years by West Coast and 6 years by Fremantle as a secondary ground in WA. Now obviously the WACA ground is still standing, as was Waverley, but there is heavy renovation going on there and it is primarily used for cricket, although in the last 2 or 3 years footy has been brought back to the ground in the form of East Fremantle playing waffle games there, while their actual home ground, East Fremantle Oval, has been redeveloped. There were 72 AFL matches held at the WACA, including an elimination final which attracted over 34,000 fans. However, in 2002, all football moved from the WACA back to Subiaco Oval permanently, and there was further redevelopments made to the ground which reduced the capacities to 20,000. Collingwood played at Victoria Park for 108 years, from 1892 to 1999, before they moved out to the MCG. It was in the late 1980s the Pies decided to start gradually making the move, hosting the occasional game at the MCG away from their spiritual home at Victoria Park. However, by the late 90s or early 2000s, the ground just became outdated and there was no more professional football played there. Subiaco Oval was WA's home of football for 109 years. It hosted some incredible waffle games which took the headlines of the WA newspapers for decades and decades. In 1979, the Wanful Grand Final between South Fremantle and East Fremantle attracted 52,000 people. In 1987, however, the West Coast Eagles moved into the VFL. Subiaco Oval played host to many iconic moments, not just from the Eagles, but also for the newer club, the Fremantle Dockers. The AFL was a resounding success at Subiaco Oval. It saw in 1991 44,000 fans pack in to a qualifying final between the Eagles and the Hawks. And in 2006 saw a Western Derby attract 43,527 people. The demolishing of the stadium actually only happened in 2019, but the plan started in 2005. The government of West Australia saw the stadium as outdated and they wanted to move to something new, especially to increase tourism in the state. There was heavy consideration about redeveloping Subiaco Oval to extend the capacity by 10 or 20,000. Instead, they chose a site in Burswood and created Optus Stadium, which meant the demolishing of Subiaco Oval was all but likely. From a personal experience, this is where I grew up, this is my childhood church, and if I could go back to any place in the world again, it would be here. The smell of Subiaco Oval is something I'll never forget. The main reason actually why Subiaco Oval was the subject of demolishing was because in 2018 or 2022, Australia had put in a FIFA World Cup bid and Subiaco Oval wasn't going to be suitable to host games in Perth. As we know, 2018 and 2022 didn't see Australia host either World Cup, but the new stadium went ahead anyway. The last event held here was in 2017 in the international rules game between Australia and Ireland. Subiaco Oval still exists in the form of a school oval. Stadium Australia, also known as Accor Stadium, is, as we know, the second biggest stadium in Australia and still very well exists. However, its AFL presence at the ground, not so much anymore. This was confirmed of no more AFL football here when Sydney and GWS both made the finals last year and chose to play at Giant Stadium in the SCG. There was a period in the 2000s and 2010s where finals were actually held here by the Sydney Swans, as well as one-off Sydney derbies in the regular season. However, complaints started to flood in. From the supporters' point of view, it was an uncomfortable experience and just not a suitable place to watch AFL football. The crowd sometimes felt a bit dry dry due to it being in such a big stadium in such a small footballing state. Aussie rules football did return in 2022 to Accor Stadium between the Giants and the Swans, but I don't think it's coming back. It also came under heavy scrutiny in 2015 where Jared Roughhead slid through the goal line and a screw dug into his body. A screw. I mean, it was a pretty unsafe place to play. Punt Road Oval is still very well standing, used as Richmond's training and administration. However, AFL games there are long gone. Richmond played VFL from 1908 to 1964 at Punt Road. It's their spiritual home. However, since 1964, it's been a mixture of the G, Waverley, and Marvel. During World War II, Melbourne actually played games at Punt Road as the MCG was being used as a military base. And also in 1956, Melbourne played a one-off game against Fitzroy at Punt Road due to Summer Olympics renovations being taking place at the MCG. The last senior VFL game here was played in 1964 between the Tigers and the Hawks, where Hawthorn won by 43 points, and the reason of moving was because the stadium capacity was reduced to 22,000 and they just simply couldn't keep playing there. It just wasn't big enough. Western Oval, Whitten Oval, whatever you want to call it, it's the spiritual home of the Western Bulldogs and where they still do train. However, there's no more professional footy being played there except for AFLW. The Bulldogs played here for 73 years during the 20th century, while in the current day it only holds 10,000. 42,000 people snuck into Wigan Oval in 1955 to see the then reigning premiers Footscray Bulldogs defeat Collingwood by 6 points. However, the move from Wigan Oval wasn't due to size or anything. The Bulldogs were more than happy to keep playing there. It was because of Footscray's attempted merge with Fitzroy. It was due to stadium leases and all that, a lot of legal issues. And following Fitzroy's merger with Brisbane in 1996, the Bulldogs moved their home matches from Wigan Oval to Princess Park, and from then on they went to the Docklands and they never looked back. A farewell match was held in 1997 in front of 26,000 people as the Bulldogs defeated West Coast by 3 goals. Princess Park in its heyday could hold over 40,000 people and held professional matches for 109 years. However, now it's just used as a training and administration base, occasionally used for pre-season games and most commonly used for AFLW. The 1945 VFL Grand Final saw Princess Park's peak, where it snuck in 62,000 people to see the Blues defeat South Melbourne by 28 points. Carlton played 962 VFL AFL games here, winning 673 of them. During World War II, Princess Park did host 3 VFL Grand Finals. The one I've already mentioned, 1945, but also in 1943 and 1942. And here's something crazy for you. In 1952, Princess Park was supposed to be redeveloped to accommodate 100,000 people for the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. It was expected that all major VFL games, VFL finals would also be transferred to this venue for the foreseeable future. However, in 1953, there was a change in the Victorian state government and the Olympic Committee changed its decision, moving the main event, the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony to the MCG. It was decided by the AFL that it was no longer fit for AFL usage, it just wasn't big enough, and Carlton made the permanent move to Marvel Stadium in the MCG. It was the last of the suburban grounds in Melbourne to be used in the AFL, and in 2005 a farewell game between the Blues and the Demons took place, where the Demons won by 18 points. In South Australia, Football Park, also known as Amy Stadium, was the state's premier venue. The Adelaide Oval was used for cricket, Football Park was used for football, and it all just worked beautifully. It was an old-fashioned ground that held some absolutely iconic moments. Similar to Subiaco Oval, it was actually a state league game that holds the attendance record here. 66,000 people got into the 1976 Sandford Grand Final between Sturt and Port Adelaide. However, with the Adelaide Oval being redeveloped, it only made sense to move to the beautiful new boutique stadium, and that meant the demolishing of Football Park begun. That being said, Adelaide still technically use Football Park as a training ground. I mean, it looks nothing like how it used to, but they still technically do. There are so many stadiums to cover, I can't fit them all in this video, so if this video gets 70 likes, I will do a part 2. If you did enjoy, please hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.